The room felt suffocating. Ivanka stood frozen, her voice trembling as she uttered one word. Dad. The silence shattered, replaced by the weight of years unspoken. That single syllable hung in the air, heavy with meaning, like a bridge neither had dared to cross. Until now. Her father sat rigid, his hands gripping the chair tightly. The pause between them stretched endlessly, filled with unspoken emotions. His face was unreadable, but his clenched jaw betrayed the storm within. Neither moved, neither spoke. Only the faint rhythm of their breathing broke the stillness. The word hung heavy in the air, like a question no one dared ask, Ivanka thought. Her mind raced with memories she'd buried deep. This wasn't just about a name. It was about everything behind it, and whatever came next would change everything, or nothing at all. Mar-a-Lago stood as a monument to luxury. Polished marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers, their soft light dancing across gilded furniture. Yet, the opulence felt hollow tonight. Ivanka's steps echoed faintly, each sound swallowed by the weight of unspoken words. The grandeur that once inspired awe now seemed like a gilded cage, its beauty unable to mask the tension simmering beneath the surface. Outside, the ocean whispered its eternal song, waves lapping gently against the shore, palm trees swaying in rhythm with the breeze. Moonlight shimmered on the water, painting the world in silver hues. But inside, the calm was a stark contrast to the storm brewing within. The salty tang of sea air drifted through open windows, mingling with the heaviness of silence. Nature's serenity mocked the turmoil that neither could articulate. The room pressed down with an almost unbearable quiet, broken only by faint sounds, the flicker of candlelight, the clink of ice in a glass, the creak of wood beneath shifting weight. Each noise felt amplified, magnifying the unsaid. Ivanka's breath hitched as she realized how empty the lavish surroundings felt compared to the gravity of the moment. The chandeliers sparkled brilliantly, yet they couldn't illuminate the void between them. It was time to speak or remain lost forever. I can handle this, she told herself, repeating the mantra like a shield against doubt. But the cracks were showing. Her eyes darted to the side, avoiding his gaze for just a moment too long. Loyalty warred with independence in her mind, a tug-of-war she'd grown weary of fighting. How could she reconcile the man who raised her with the choices that left her questioning everything? Her smile faltered briefly before snapping back into place, polished and practiced. Yet inside, her thoughts screamed louder than any words ever could. He leaned forward, his posture commanding, exuding the authority that defined him. But there was something else, a flicker of uncertainty behind his steely gaze. His brow furrowed as he studied her, searching for answers he wasn't sure he wanted to hear. When he spoke, his voice carried its usual confidence, but the pause before each sentence revealed more than he intended. "You've always been strong, Ivanka," he said finally, his tone softer than expected. For all his bravado, there was vulnerability here, a father grappling with pride, love, and the fear of losing what mattered most. Between them lay a legacy tangled with emotion. Admiration clashing with disillusionment, pride wrestling with disappointment. Ivanka's admiration for her father's resilience was undeniable, yet shadows of doubt lingered over decisions she couldn't fully support. Meanwhile, Donald's pride in her accomplishments mingled with a quiet dread. Would she walk away from everything they'd built together? Neither spoke of these fears directly, but the tension hung thick in the air. Their bond was both their anchor and their battleground, a testament to love's complexity. As silence stretched between them, one truth became clear. Whatever came next would redefine not just their relationship, but themselves. "Do you ever wonder if we've done more harm than good?" Ivanka's voice cut through the air like a blade, sharp and unyielding. The words hung there, suspended in the silence that followed. For a moment, it felt as though even the world outside had paused. The waves stopped crashing. The wind ceased its whisper. Her question wasn't just a query. It was an accusation, a plea, and a confession all rolled into one. Each syllable carried the weight of years unspoken, pressing down on them both with unbearable force. Donald froze, his hand still clutching the glass he'd been about to raise. Slowly, deliberately, he set it down, the faint clink against the surface echoing unnaturally loud in the quiet room. His eyes widened slightly, shock rippling across his features before he masked it with practiced control. But the stiffness in his posture betrayed him, his shoulders rigid, his jaw clenched. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes as he sat there, unmoving, grappling with the enormity of her words. What could he say? What should he say? Gradually, the tension in his frame began to ease. His shoulders slumped ever so slightly, and his gaze dropped, no longer meeting hers. A deep sigh escaped him, heavy with resignation. He glanced toward the window, though not really seeing anything beyond the glass. "Ivanka," he started, his voice softer now, almost fragile. It wasn't an answer. It was an acknowledgement. The vulnerability in his tone sent a shiver through her. She watched as he nodded faintly, silently conceding the truth buried within her question. The air grew heavier, charged with emotions neither dared to name yet. Ivanka remembered the sound of applause like thunder, her small hands clapping furiously as she peeked out from behind his leg. He was larger than life, confident, commanding, untouchable. To her young mind, he could fix anything, solve any problem. She'd cling to him, wide-eyed with admiration, believing the world revolved around his strength. Back then, everything seemed so simple. But that innocence had planted seeds of expectation. Expectations neither of them could ever fully meet. Now, those memories felt bittersweet, a reminder of how far they'd drifted. As an adult, Ivanka began to see the cracks in the pedestal she'd placed him on. Controversy swirled, headlines screamed, and sacrifices piled up. Loyalty came at a cost. Her voice muted, her choices weighed against family duty. She wrestled with doubt, torn between defending him and questioning the decisions that shaped their legacy. Each scandal chipped away at the image she once held sacred, yet even as disillusionment grew, love lingered. A complicated, stubborn kind of love that refused to let go. It left her wondering where admiration ended and obligation began. "I want to make you proud," she thought, guilt twisting inside her chest. But pride wasn't enough anymore. The weight of staying true to herself while honoring familial duty crushed her. Independence called to her, whispering promises of freedom, but fear held her back. The fear of disappointing him, of being judged, of losing what little remained of their bond. Who was she without the name? And who was she if she abandoned it? The tension tore at her, leaving her raw and uncertain. For the first time, she admitted, "I don't know who I am anymore." Her voice trembled as the words spilled out. What happens when history looks back at us? Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision. Her hands shook, betraying the calm she tried so hard to project. Will we be remembered for doing good, or for all the harm we couldn't stop? She looked away, unable to face him directly. The question hung there, heavy and unanswerable. It wasn't just about him. It was about her too. Both were bound by the same legacy, the same fears of judgment and redemption. Donald leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. His usual bravado softened into something quieter, more human. Hands clasped tightly, he listened. Not as a public figure, but as a father. For once there was no deflection, no grand gesture, just silence, steady and profound. In that moment, Ivanka saw not the man the world knew, but the man who raised her. The intensity of his focus left her breathless, anticipation building for what might come next. Donald reached across the table, his hand trembling slightly as he took hers. The gesture was uncharacteristic, vulnerable, a crack in the armor he wore so well. "I never meant for any of this to hurt you," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. Each word carried the weight of years unspoken, revealing a side of him hidden from the world. His grip tightened faintly, as if afraid she might pull away. For the first time, Ivanka saw not just the man who shaped her life, but the father who loved her deeply and imperfectly. Tears spilled freely now, tracing paths down her cheeks as she struggled to speak through choked breaths. "You give me so much." Her voice broke, shaky and raw. She paused, gathering strength before continuing. "But maybe it's time I find my own way." The words felt like a release, lifting a burden she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. Pain and relief mingled in equal measure, leaving her lightheaded. She glanced down briefly, unable to meet his gaze, then forced herself to look up. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted. Between them, within her. It was liberation, painful, yet necessary. Donald nodded slowly, his expression unreadable but resolute. He loosened his grip on her hand, the warmth of their connection lingering even as he pulled away. The act was simple, almost imperceptible, yet profound. In letting go, he acknowledged what she needed most: freedom. His eyes held a quiet resolve, a promise that his love wouldn't waver, even if their paths diverged. The silence between them stretched, heavy with meaning. Where their hands had touched, a faint warmth remained, a reminder of where they'd been and where they were headed, separately but together. This moment resonated deeply, tapping into universal truths about love, sacrifice, and self-discovery. Readers felt the ache of familial duty colliding with personal growth, recognizing echoes of their own struggles. Forgiveness became more than an act. It was a bridge, spanning gaps created by pride, expectation, and fear. As Ivanka stepped toward independence and Donald embraced acceptance, their story reminded audiences of the power of understanding in relationships. It wasn't perfect, nor was it easy, but it was real, and in its raw honesty lay a reflection of humanity itself, leaving hearts full and minds thoughtful. Sometimes, the hardest thing isn't staying together, it's knowing when to let go. Her voice was steady now, though tinged with emotion. The words hung between them, heavy yet freeing, like releasing a bird into flight. It wasn't just about her. It was about anyone who had ever clung to something out of fear or obligation. She realized now that growth came not from holding on, but from trusting herself enough to step away. In this moment, she understood. Letting go wasn't failure. It was courage. Her realization echoed beyond their shared story, touching something universal. Authenticity over approval. Courage over comfort. These weren't just ideals. They were choices, hard ones, that demanded vulnerability. True strength wasn't in never faltering, but in rising after every stumble, even if it meant walking alone for a while. For Ivanka, it meant forging her own path. For others, it might mean leaving behind what no longer fit: the job, the relationship, the version of themselves they'd outgrown. Growth required risk, and risk required faith. What are you holding on to that no longer serves you? The question lingered, unspoken yet potent, inviting readers to turn inward. Could they find the courage to release what weighed them down, to choose authenticity over ease? As Ivanka stood at her crossroads, so too did each reader stand at theirs. Hope bloomed in the quiet, a reminder that letting go wasn't an end, but a beginning, and sometimes beginnings were exactly what we needed most. Ivanka rose slowly, her hand smoothing the fabric of her dress, a small, deliberate motion that spoke volumes. It was a gesture of composure, but beneath it lay the storm of emotions she'd worked so hard to steady. Her lips curved into a smile, bittersweet and fleeting, carrying gratitude for what had been and resolve for what lay ahead. Standing there, she felt the weight of the moment settle over her. This wasn't just an exit, it was a new beginning. And as she turned toward the door, she knew this marked the end of one chapter and the start of another. At the threshold, she paused, glancing back one last time. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but unwavering, "for everything." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, encapsulating years of love, struggle, and sacrifice. They weren't just a goodbye. They were an acknowledgement of all they'd shared and all they'd overcome. Silence followed, stretching endlessly, yet it felt full rather than empty. In that quiet, the echoes of their journey lingered, binding them even as they moved apart. Readers sat still, hearts pounding with the raw emotion of the scene. Ivanka's courage resonated deeply, stirring memories of their own moments of letting go. Relationships ended, paths diverged, or chapters closed. Gratitude mingled with pain, reminding them that growth often came wrapped in heartache. As the story faded, a sense of release washed over them, leaving behind clarity and hope. Inspired by her vulnerability, they found themselves reflecting. What doors had they been afraid to open? What goodbyes had they been too scared to say? In the silence, they felt connected, not just to the story, but to themselves.